Malcolm Reed didn't notice the woman in the mauve coat until she stopped walking. The courthouse lobby smelled like wet wool and floor polish. Rain ticked against the glass doors behind him. Malcolm shifted the file box's arms. Pay stubs lease, the folder labeled expungement. Try not to look like what people always decided he was the moment they saw him. "Excuse me," the woman said, voice bright as a bell. "That's my phone." Malcolm blinked. "Ma'am." Her gaze snapped to his hands. "You took it off the bench. I saw you." Around them, bodies slowed. A security guard by the metal detector leaned forward, hand drifting toward his radio. Malcolm's mouth went dry. "I didn't touch your phone," he said, keeping his voice even. "Keep it even. Keep it small." The woman's face tightened. Fear or performance, Malcolm couldn't tell. "Don't lie," she whispered, but it carried. "Not here. Not here." Like here was sacred, and he was a stain. The guard stepped in, blocking the exit with practiced calm. "Sir," set the box down. "I'm here to file paperwork," Malcolm said. "Please, I can show you." The woman lifted her wrist, displaying a red mark like a verdict. "He grabbed me," she said softly. Everything held for one sharp breath. Then the guard's radio crackled. Possible assault in the lobby. Malcolm looked at the woman's wrist and realized the mark was still spreading, like ink in water. Malcolm Reed set the box down like it was glass. Cardboard scraped tile, loud in the hush. The security guard's badge read D. Klein. His hand hovered near Malcolm's shoulder, not touching, but close enough to feel like a threat. "Hands where I can see 'em," Klein said. Malcolm raised both hands. Fingers spread. "Sir, I didn't. I'm here to file." "Ma'am, you okay?" Klein asked, already turning away from Malcolm, as if the story had chosen its side. The woman in the mauve coat pressed 2 fingers to her wrist. Pearl studs, neat bob, the kind of calm that made people believe her. "He took my phone off the bench," she said. "When I asked for it back, he grabbed me." Malcolm's eyes snapped to the bench she pointed at. Empty. "I didn't touch your phone," he said, voice force level. "Keep it even. Keep it small. There are cameras. Please check the cameras." A few people in line stepped back from him, without looking at him. Someone's kid began to whine, then cry. The glass doors opened and 2 courthouse deputies entered, rain shining on their shoulders. One of them, Deputy Latham, didn't ask questions. He looked at Malcolm's hands and went for cuffs. "Wait," Malcolm said, pulse hammering. "You're arresting me because she said so?" "Turn around," Latham ordered. Malcolm turned. Because turning was safer than resisting, because he'd learned the math of survival early. Cold metal cinched his wrists. "Ma'am," Malcolm said, twisting just enough to see her. "Your phone, where is it?" The woman's mouth quivered like she might cry. Then she lifted a black smartphone from her coat pocket, slow as a magic trick. "I found it," she said. "It was in my pocket, but he still grabbed me." The air left Malcolm's chest. "Then tell them you were wrong," he said, louder now. "Tell them." Klein hesitated. "Ma'am." Her gaze slid away like it couldn't stand to hold his. "I'm not wrong," she murmured. "I know what I felt." Feelings weren't facts. Malcolm wanted to scream it. He wanted to ask why her wrist was red in the exact shape of fingers when his hands had been full of a box. Instead, Latham steered him through a side door that shut with a blunt click. In the holding hallway, fluorescent lights buzzed like angry insects. Latham patted Malcolm down, brisk and impersonal. "ID?" Latham asked. "In my wallet. Back pocket." Latham flipped Malcolm's license between 2 fingers. "Malcolm James Reed," he read, and the name sounded like conclusion. "You got priors, Malcolm?" "No." The lie came out by instinct, then burned. "I have a trespass from when I was 19. I'm here trying to get it cleared." Latham's mouth twitched. "Uh-huh." At processing, a clerk typed without looking up. "Assault," she said. "Attempted theft." "Attempted theft?" Malcolm's laugh came out thin. Her phone was in her pocket. The clerk's eyes flicked up to the same scan everyone did. Skin, height, shoulders, then went flat. "Tell it to the judge." They let him call once. Malcolm's hand shook so hard He almost dropped the receiver. He dialed Tasha. She answered on the second ring. Mal, you at court? His voice nagged. They arrested me. What? Her breath hitched. For what? A woman said I stole her phone. Then she said I grabbed her. I didn't, Tash. I swear. Okay. Tasha forced calm, the way she did when bills piled up, or the car made that sound again. Don't talk to them. Don't sign anything. I'm calling a lawyer. We can't afford. Malcolm. His name was a boundary. We can't afford you without one. A deputy knocked the wall. Time. I love you, Malcolm said fast. I love you too, she whispered. Hold on. The line went dead. In the holding cell, a man with salt and pepper braids watched Malcolm pace. First time they put cuffs on you for breathing? He asked, voice low. Malcolm stopped. She lied. The man shrugged, sad and tired. Lies land different depending on who says them. He nodded toward the wall where rules were taped crooked. You think they wrote those for her? Malcolm stared at the paper. It was all order and consequences. None of it meant for the people who made the accusation. Not once for her. By afternoon, they walked him through a public corridor anyway. Cuffs on, chain at his waist. People stared like he was a lesson. A local news camera waited near the doors. Someone had tipped them off. The red light blinked as Malcolm passed. At arraignment, the judge's eyes barely lifted. The prosecutor spoke like he was reading weather. Victim feared for her safety. Mr. Reed has a record. We request remand. Malcolm's public defender leaned in, whispering. They say there's lobby surveillance, but it isn't in the file yet. Not in the file. Like truth was optional. Malcolm swallowed. There are cameras, he told the judge. Please. The gavel tapped once, small but final. Bail denied pending review. The room tilted. Deputies closed in. As they turned him toward the exit, the woman in mauve sat in the second row, eyes dry. She met Malcolm's gaze and, without moving her lips, formed two silent words. Stay down. Then, behind the benches, a deputy murmured into a phone. Yeah, the lobby footage? It's gone. The first thing Malcolm heard in the morning was his own name, clipped and distant, floating from the television bolted high in the corner of the holding area. Malcolm Reed, arraigned yesterday on charges of assault and attempted theft. He craned his neck. The screen showed courthouse steps, rain-dark stone, and a mugshot taken under fluorescent lights that made his skin look gray. The anchor's voice was smooth, neutral, practiced. Authorities say the victim feared for her safety. Feared. That was the word that stuck. Not lied, not mistaken. Feared. The man with the salt and pepper braids shook his head. They already decided who you are, he said. Now, they're just fitting the fact around it. By noon, Malcolm was released on conditional supervision. No apology, no explanation. A deputy slid his belongings across the counter like leftovers. Outside, the sky was a hard, polished blue, too clean for how he felt. Tasha waited by the curb, arms crossed tight over her belly. When she saw him, the tightness broke. She hugged him like she was checking to see if he was real. They ran it on Channel 7. She said into a jacket. Just a few seconds, but enough. Malcolm pulled back. What do they say? That you allegedly grabbed a woman. Her jaw set. And that you have a record. He flinched. It's a trespass. From college. They didn't say that part. At home, the apartment felt smaller, like the walls had leaned in overnight to listen. Malcolm showered twice, scrubbing until his skin burned, but the smell of disinfectant from the jail clung anyway. When he came out, Tasha was on the phone at the kitchen table, voice low. Yes, he's home, she said. No, there's no conviction. Yes, I understand company policy. She hung up and didn't look at him. They put you on administrative leave. For how long? They didn't say. Administrative leave sounded neutral. It felt like being erased with a polite smile. That afternoon, a public defender named Paul met them over video. His tie was crooked, his eyes tired. The prosecutor offered a plea, he said. Misdemeanor assault. Time served, anger management. It keeps you out of jail. Malcolm stared at the screen. I didn't do anything. Paul nodded, like he'd heard that sentence 1,000 times. I know, but the risk. The risk is I admit to something I didn't do, Malcolm said. His voice shook. The risk is I live with that. Paul sighed. The footage isn't available. Without it, it's your word against hers. Tasha leaned forward. Why isn't it available? Technical issue, Paul said. That's what they're saying. After the call, silence pooled in the room. Tasha rubbed her temples. My mom called. She said finally. She asked if you could have misunderstood. Malcolm laughed once, sharp. Misunderstood what? Her pocket. I told her no, Tasha said quickly. I told her I believe you. But she asked, he said, because they made it sound reasonable. That night, Malcolm couldn't sleep. Every creak of the building sounded like a footstep. He replayed the lobby in his head. The woman's voice, the guard hand, the way people had stepped back. Fear wasn't just something claimed against him. It was something he now carried. The next morning, Detective Rourke called. I'd like to clear a few things up, Rourke said, voice friendly in a way that meant it wasn't. Come by the station. Malcolm hesitated. My lawyer. This is an interrogation, Rourke said. Just conversation. At the station, Rourke sat across from him with a legal pad. You ever been angry at a woman before? He asked casually. What? Sometimes things escalate, Rourke said. You don't strike me as a bad guy, just reactive. I didn't touch her, Malcolm said. Rourke scribbled something. She was scared. She lied. Rourke's pen paused. Careful, he said. Accusing a victim doesn't play well. Outside, Malcolm's phone buzzed. A notification from a neighborhood group he'd never joined. A screenshot of the news clip. Comments piling up beneath it. Looks about right. Why was he even there? You can tell when someone's dangerous. He shut the phone off. That evening, a woman named Renee Alvarez knocked on their door. She wore scuffed heels and carried a canvas bag stuffed with files. I'm with the Community Justice Clinic, she said. We've seen cases like yours. Malcolm didn't let himself hope. The footage is gone. Renee smiled thinly. Footage doesn't just disappear, she said. Someone makes it disappear, and that someone leaves fingerprints. Tasha exhaled for first time all day. Renee spread papers across the table. They want you to plead because the story they're telling is easy, she said. Fearful woman, aggressive man, clean narrative. And the truth? Malcolm asked. The truth is inconvenient, Renee said, which means it's powerful. She packed up to leave, pausing at the door. They've chosen the story they prefer, she said. Now we make them choke on it. After she left, Malcolm stood at the window, watching headlights smeared down the street. Somewhere, a lie was settling into place, being repeated until it sounded like fact. He pressed his palm to glass and whispered to the dark, I won't disappear. And somewhere downtown, a file sat mislabeled, waiting. The jail taught Malcolm a new way to measure time, not by hours or meals, but by paper, requests filed, forms returned, grievances stamped and lost, paper that promised process and delivered waiting. He sat on the edge of the bunk, orange uniform creased sharp at the knees, listening to a man 2 cells down argue with a guard about a missing request slip. I put it in your hand, the man said. Then it's in the system. The guard replied, bored. If it's not in the system, it doesn't exist. Malcolm stared at his own hands. He'd carried his life into that courthouse in a box. Now his life fit into a folder. Renee Alvarez visited on Tuesday. The room smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. Phones hung on cords like leashes. They denied bail reconsideration, she said without preamble. Said you're a flight risk. I have a lease, Malcolm said. A job, a kid on the way. Renee nodded. I know. They know. It doesn't matter yet. She slid papers through the slot. I filed motions for footage, subpoenaed the courthouse security logs, asked for every maintenance report on the lobby cameras. And they're slow walking, Renee said. That's a tactic. Malcolm swallowed. What about her? Lydia Hart, Renee said. No priors. Volunteers with a civic group. Her story hasn't changed. Because it doesn't have to, Malcolm said. Renee held his gaze. Because the system is carrying it for her. When Renee left, Malcolm pressed his forehead to the cool cinder block. He thought of Tasha, of her hand shaking when she tried to pour water the night before he was remanded. He thought of the word flight risk and how easily it replaced truth. That night, his cellmate, a wiry man named Deshawn, leaned back on his bunk. "What you in for?" he asked. "Assault?" Malcolm said, hating the way the word tasted. Deshawn snorted. "You look like an assault?" Malcolm didn't answer. Deshawn shrugged. "They say that about everybody who looks like us. It's a shortcut. Saves them thinking." The next morning, Tasha called during free phone hours. Her voice sounded farther away than the distance allowed. "I talked to a bail bondsman," she said. "He said, maybe if we get letters." "From who?" "Your boss," she said. "Neighbors. Church." Malcolm laughed softly. "The boss who put me on leave?" Silence. "I'll ask," Tasha said. "I'll ask everyone." Guilt settled heavy in Malcolm's chest. "You shouldn't have to beg for me to exist," he said. "I'm not begging," Tasha said, fierce. "I'm documenting." Across town, Detective Rourke sat in an office with beige walls and a flag in the corner. He flipped through witness statements from the lobby. Most were thin. Phrases like "looked angry," "moved fast," "seemed suspicious." He circled those words and read. When a clerk hesitated, Rourke leaned in. "You're sure?" he asked. "You don't want to be wrong." The clerk swallowed. I think so." Rourke smiled. "Good. Just stick to that." Back in jail, Malcolm received a notice. The prosecution intended to introduce his trespass case as context. Not evidence, just atmosphere. A way to darken a room. Renee called that afternoon. "They're building a pattern," she said. "That's how they make one incident feel inevitable." "What do we do?" "We interrupt it," Renee said. "I found something." Malcolm sat up. "What?" "The cameras," Renee said. "An IT worker told me, off the record, that the lobby system doesn't overwrite for 90 days. Even corrupted files leave traces. So it's not gone." "Not gone," Renee said. "Hidden." Hope rose too fast, sharp and dangerous. "Then show it." "It's not that simple," Renee said. "Access requires approval, and approvals leave names." "Whose name?" Malcolm asked. "That's what we're digging for." A week passed, then another. Malcolm learned the rhythms. Count, chow count. He learned which guards ignored him and which watched him like he might explode. One afternoon, a new detainee was brought in, wrists raw from cuffs. He looked at Malcolm and said, "They say you grabbed a lady at court." Malcolm closed his eyes. The lie had legs. Renee visited again, eyes bright with fatigue. "We got a maintenance report," she said. "Dated the morning of your arrest. States, all cameras operational." Malcolm leaned forward until his forehead touched the glass. "So someone lied." "Yes," Renee said. "And that lie is smaller than hers, but more dangerous." "Who requested the footage?" Malcolm asked. Renee smiled, thin and sharp. "That's the next paper chain." Outside, Kiera Bell watched the courthouse from across the street, notebook on her lap. She'd covered police accountability long enough to recognize patterns. Missing footage was one of them. She made a call. "I've got a case," she said. "Courthouse lobby. Assault allegation. Video gone." On the other end, a source sighed. Again, that night, Malcolm dreamed of the lobby bench. In the dream, his box dissolved into papers that fluttered up and stuck to people's hands, their faces, their mouths. No matter how he spoke, the papers spoke louder. He woke with his heart racing. In the morning, a guard called his name. Legal mail. Inside the envelope was a single page from Renee. They found the log. Request submitted. Courthouse security time. 10:42 a.m. approved. 10:44 a.m. 2 minutes. Malcolm traced the times with his finger. 2 minutes for truth to be contained. 2 minutes to decide which story would live. He folded the paper carefully and placed it under his mattress, like a talisman. The system had paper chains, but so did he now. And chains, one scene could be pulled. The witness arrived with a borrowed certainty. He wore a windbreaker zipped too high and spoke in sentences that floated just far enough from specifics to be useful. In court filings, he was labeled bystander A. In the hallway outside the courtroom, he kept rubbing his palms on his jeans like he was trying to erase something. Renee read his statement twice, looked aggressive, moved quickly, made the woman uncomfortable. No verbs that could be tested. No moments that could be pinned down. Does he say he saw contact? Malcolm asked, leaning over the papers. Renee shook her head. He says he saw a situation developing. That's lawyer food. Inside the courtroom, the air felt thinner. Malcolm sat beside Renee, suit borrowed from a cousin, cuffs removed but memory intact. Across the aisle, Lydia Hart sat straight back, hands folded, the picture of restraint. She didn't look at Malcolm. The prosecutor rose. The state calls its witness. Bystander A took the stand. His voice trembled, then steadied when the prosecutor nodded encouragement. I saw the defendant approach the woman, he said. He was intense. Renee stood. Objection to characterization. Sustained, the judge said mildly. The witness cleared his throat. He moved fast. I thought he might do something. Did you see him touch her? Renee asked when it was her turn. Well, no, but... No, Renee repeated. Thank you. The prosecutor tried again. How did the woman appear? Scared. The witness said immediately. Renee leaned in. How do you know? He hesitated. She said she was. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Renee let it breathe. So your testimony that she was scared is based on her statement, not your observation. Yes, he said quieter. Renee nodded, satisfied for now. Outside the courtroom, Lydia's attorney put a hand on her elbow, steering her past Malcolm without pause. Cameras flashed. Lydia flinched at the light, then composed herself. It was a practice move. That afternoon, Tasha sat across from Malcolm's supervisor in a glass-wall conference room that smelled like lemon cleaner. The supervisor smiled too much. We value Malcolm, she said, but this situation is complicated. Complicated how? Tasha asked. Well, the supervisor said carefully, there are reputational concerns. Tasha leaned forward. He hasn't been convicted of anything. Of course, the supervisor said, which is why we're not firing him. But you took his badge, Tasha said, and his access, temporarily. Tasha stood. Do you know what temporary does to rent? The supervisor's smile flickered. We're following protocol. Protocol. Another word that made harm sound tidy. Back in court, Renee filed a motion challenging the witness's credibility, attaching studies about implicit bias and the unreliability of fear-based testimony. The prosecutor rolled his eyes. You're making this political, he said. Renee didn't blink. I'm making it accurate. That night, Malcolm sat on the couch, staring at the muted TV. His phone buzzed. Another message request, another comment thread dissecting his face. Aggressive jaw, dead eyes. You can tell. He set the phone face down. I don't feel real anymore, he said. Tasha crossed the room and took his hands. You are real, she said. They're just loud. A knock came at the door. Renee stood there again, jacket slung over her shoulder. I need to tell you something before you hear it elsewhere, she said. Malcolm's chest tightened. Tell me. They're pushing for stricter conditions, Renee said. Curfew, electronic monitoring. For what? Pressure, Renee said. They want you tired, desperate. Malcolm nodded slowly. And the footage? Renee's eyes sparked. I followed the maintenance report. It led me to a supervisor in courthouse security. And he says the cameras were working, Renee said. And that someone from law enforcement requested the lobby footage immediately. Rourke, Malcolm said. Not on paper, Renee replied. But the approval signature matches his unit. A silence settled, not to spare clarity. Later that week, Malcolm returned to court, wearing a plastic band around his ankle. The monitor itched, a constant reminder that freedom could be leased back in pieces. The prosecutor smirked when he noticed it. Renee noticed too. Smile all you want, she whispered to Malcolm. That thing's evidence. During a recess, a woman in a courthouse polo lingered near Renee. She spoke without looking at her. "You didn't get this from me," the woman said, "but access requests are logged twice, once internally, once with the vendor." Renee's breath caught. "Where?" The woman slid a sticky note across the counter. Vendor name, account manager. "Good luck." When Renee showed Malcolm a note, his hands shook, not with fear, but with a dangerous weight of possibility. "So there's another copy," he said. "There might be," Renee said, "if it auto-backed up." Across the room, Lydia laughed softly with her attorney. It sounded like relief. Malcolm watched her, try to reconcile the woman from the lobby with the symbol she'd become. He didn't hate her. That surprised him. What he felt was colder. She had been believed because belief cost her nothing. As court adjourned, the judge warned against trying this case in the media. Renee nodded politely, already drafting motions in her head. Outside, the sky was bruised purple. Sirens wailed in the distance. Renee paused on the courthouse steps. "They found a witness because they needed one," she said. "They tightened your leash because they're nervous." "Nervous about what?" Malcolm asked. "The truth," Renee said. "It's inconvenient, and it's close." Malcolm touched the monitor on his ankle, then his chest. For the first time since the lobby, the story they preferred felt fragile. And fragile things, he was learning, could be broken. The photograph was worse than Malcolm remembered. Projected onto the courtroom screen, Lydia Hart's wrist filled the wall, red, inflamed, the suggestion of fingers like parentheses closing in. The prosecutor let it linger, letting the room absorb what was trained to see. "An injury consistent with forceful grab," he said. Malcolm felt Tasha's hand tighten around his knee. He focused on breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Don't give them anything else to use. Renee rose slowly. "May I?" she asked the judge. She approached the screen, not touching it. "When was this photograph taken?" "Minutes after the incident," the prosecutor said. Renee nodded. "Minutes matter," she said, turning to Lydia. "Ms. Hart, you testified that Mr. Reed grabbed your wrist during the confrontation. Is that correct?" "Yes," Lydia said. Her voice was soft, steady. "I felt his fingers." Renee tilted her head. "Which hand?" "My left," Lydia said. "He used his right." Renee clicked her pen. "You're certain?" "Yes." Renee paced once. "You're right-handed," she said. Lydia blinked. Yes." "And you were holding your phone in your right hand when security approached," Renee continued. "I don't see how that." "So your right hand was occupied," Renee said gently, "yet the redness appears on your left wrist, on the side most accessible to your own right hand." The prosecutor stood. "Objection, speculation." "Sustained," the judge said. "Rephrase." Renee didn't miss a beat. "Ms. Hart, did you touch your wrist after the incident?" Lydia's eyes flicked to her attorney. "I may have," she said. "I was shaken." Renee nodded. "Shaken people touch themselves to self-soothe," she said. "That's human. What's also human is that skin reacts to pressure." The room was quiet now. The photograph felt less like proof and more like a question. Renee continued. "You said the redness appeared immediately." "Yes." Renee clicked to the timestamp. "Medical literature shows that pressure marks from brief contact often take time to surface," she said. "They spread. Bloom." The prosecutor objected again. The judge allowed limited questioning. Renee turned to the jury box. "I'm not asking you to decide how Ms. Hart felt," she said. "I'm asking you to notice how certainty is being constructed." Lydia's composure cracked for the first time. "Are you saying I did this to myself?" Renee met her gaze. "I'm saying the mark is not the memory," she said. "And memory is not proof." During the recess, Malcolm sat with his head bowed. The ankle monitor hummed softly, a mechanical heartbeat. "You okay?" Tasha whispered. "I feel like I'm on trial for how I look," he said. "Not what I did." "That's because you are," she said. Outside the courtroom, Detective Rourke watched the proceedings on a small screen. His jaw tightened. He made a call. "Push conditions," he said. "He's getting traction." That afternoon, Malcolm's phone buzzed with a message from his employer's HR department. We're reviewing developments. Please refrain from public statements. Public statements, Malcolm muttered, like truth is a PR issue. At a community meeting that evening, Tasha sat in a folding chair beneath flickering fluorescent lights. A pastor spoke about patience. A city council member spoke about trust. I'm not racist, but a woman began, and Tasha felt something harden in her chest. When it was her turn, Tasha stood. My partner was accused of something he didn't do, she said. And every system you're telling me to trust lined up to make that accusation stick. The room shifted. Some people nodded. Others looked away. Back in Renee's office, papers covered every surface. She replayed Lydia's testimony, frame by frame. Fear is persuasive, Renee said, especially when it looks polite. What if they still believe her? Malcolm asked. They might, Renee said. Belief isn't neutral, but facts have a way of surviving pressure. She pulled a folder from her bag. I got access to a clerk, she said. Quietly. Malcolm leaned in. And there's a second log, Renee said. Internal access requests are mirrored in a vendor system. Same timestamps, same approvals. So the footage may exist outside their control, Renee finished. If we can get it. Malcolm closed his eyes. Relief surged, followed by anger so sharp it made his hands tremble. They let me sit in jail knowing that, he said. Yes, Renee said, and that matters. The next morning, Lydia's civic group released a statement praising her courage. The photo of her wrist circulated again, cropped tighter, cleaner, stripped of context. Courage. Malcolm tasted the word and found it hollow. At the courthouse, a security supervisor was called into a closed-door meeting. He emerged pale, avoiding eye contact. That afternoon, Renee filed an emergency motion demanding vendor records. The prosecutor accused her of grandstanding. This isn't politics, Renee said. It's accountability. That night, Malcolm stood on the balcony of their apartment, city lights blinking like distant signals. Tasha joined him, slipping her hand into his. I'm scared, she said. I know, he said. So am I. But I'm also angry, she said. And that feels useful. Below them, a siren rose and faded. Somewhere downtown, servers hummed, indifferent, holding on to data no one thought to fully erase. Malcolm rested his hand over Tasha's. That mark, he said softly. It was made for belief. Tasha squeezed his fingers. Then we'll answer with proof. Inside, Renee's email chimed a reply from a vendor. We retain backups. The lie had left a bruise, and bruises, once examined, told stories a body couldn't keep forever. The logbook was quiet, almost innocuous. A hardcover binder, tucked behind a filing cabinet in a dim hallway of the courthouse, with yellowing pages and ink that had bled over time. Most people passed it without notice, but Renee Alvarez saw what it was, a ledger of power, decisions, and what the system wanted hidden. She slipped Malcolm's fingers into the binder first, letting him feel the weight of paper. The smell of bureaucracy. Every request is logged, she said. Every approval leaves a mark. Someone can't just say it's gone. Malcolm traced the columns with his finger. Timestamps, badge numbers, initials. His heart thudded against his ribs. Rourke's unit, he whispered. It's all here. Yes, Renee said. And that's just the beginning. Look at this. This page shows an access request for lobby footage. Requested 10 minutes after your arrest. Approved 2 minutes later. Then the file is marked corrupted. Someone wanted it to disappear. Malcolm's stomach tightened. 2 minutes. 2 minutes for a truth-altering decision to be made. And no one noticed the damage until now. We're going to force them to explain. Renee said, this is official record. Chain of custody can't lie. Outside the courthouse, Lydia Hart's presence was almost ceremonial. She walked with her attorney, head high, expression practiced. Cameras followed her, each click reinforcing the story Malcolm had tried to correct. Inside, Malcolm's ankle monitor hummed softly. The mechanical heartbeat reminded him that even now, freedom was least monitored, controlled. He had never felt more exposed, more tethered to a system that treated him like a variable rather than a human being. During lunch, Tasha sat across from him, paper strewn across the small cafeteria table. She held a stack of community letters, notes from neighbors, colleagues, anyone willing to vouch for Malcolm's character. They'll try to dismiss it, she said, but it matters that someone's on your side. It's not just that, Malcolm said. It's that they already decided. Everything I do now is just defense. It's too late to be normal. Tasha reached across and held his hand. Then we redefine normal. Start by proving what they tried to erase. Renee reappeared that afternoon with a printout of a vendor communication, a confirmation that a backup copy of the lobby footage existed outside the courthouse system. Malcolm leaned forward, heart hammering. So it's not gone? Not gone, Renee said. And this is where leverage begins. The courtroom had become a theater. Prosecutors wielded evidence like props. Witnesses delivered lines that sounded rehearsed. And the public, hungry for closure, consumed it without context. Malcolm had learned that narratives were easier to believe than facts, especially when facts were inconvenient. Renee explained the next step. We file a motion to subpoena the vendor. They must produce the original footage. They cannot ignore a court order, and any alteration will be visible in the metadata. Malcolm nodded. Metadata? Digital fingerprints. Renee said, the timestamp, the file size, the creator. They can't erase it all. And if they tried, well, that's tampering. The thought of tampering made Malcolm's chest tighten. Not just the accusation, not just the arrest, but deliberate efforts to hide the truth. Every moment he spent in jail, every hour Tasha spent worrying, had been compounded by someone's choice to conceal evidence. That night, he slept fitfully, dreams tangled with the image of the lobby bench, the box of files in his arms, the flash of cameras, and Lydia's calm, unbroken gaze. He woke sweating, the rhythm of the ankle monitor echoing in his mind. Renee visited early the next morning. She carried a tablet, pulled up frames from the vendor's backup log. See this? She said. Every request, every approval, every access attempt. It's time-stamped, traceable. And here's the kicker. The footage itself hasn't been viewed by anyone outside this unit. Malcolm squinted at the images. Grainy, black and white, lobby angles he had memorized from memory. There he was, carrying the box. There Lydia was, reaching into her pocket for her phone. Nothing else. The truth, in quiet motion, unassuming. So they fabricated the story around the narrative, Malcolm whispered. Yes, Renee said. And now we have the means to prove it. But timing is crucial. They could still try to suppress it until the next hearing. Malcolm's hands curled around the tablet. Then we can't wait. Every hour counts. At lunch, Tasha held his hand again. You're stronger than you think, she said. You've endured this so far. Now it's time to fight back. Malcolm nodded. He thought of the people who had stared, who had whispered, who had believed the lie without questioning. He thought of the chains, paper chains, ankle monitors, courtroom labels, that had bound him, and he realized chains would be documented, traced, and exposed. That afternoon, Renee filed the motions, attaching the vendor backup as evidence. The judge reviewed them quickly, scanning the logs, the timestamps. This will require a hearing, the judge said. Ensure all parties are present. Malcolm felt a flicker of hope. Not relief, not victory. Not yet. Just hope. When he returned to holding cell, Deshawn looked at him and asked, You got a plan now? Malcolm nodded. The story they made's fragile. Deshawn raised an eyebrow. Fragile how? Malcolm leaned back against the wall. Fragile enough that truth can break it. And somewhere behind locked doors, the system had recorded its own misstep. Every access, every approval, every signature in the logbook, the evidence of deliberate omission was a crack in the narrative, a crack that Malcolm was ready to widen. The lie had been built with speed and certainty, but paper, metadata, and time were allies now. And Malcolm, finally, felt a spark of control he hadn't felt since the lobby. Public pressure has a strange way of creeping in. At first, it was whispers in online forums, complaints about courthouse cameras, speculation about a missing file. Then Kiera Bell, the journalist Renee had contacted, ran a story exposing a string of technical issues in lobby camera systems. The headlines didn't mention Malcolm by name at first, but the insinuation was unmistakable. Files disappear, evidence fails, and the system favors certain narratives. Malcolm sat across from Renee in the cramped conference room at the Community Justice Clinic. The room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old paper. "They've noticed the attention," Renee said. "The courthouse, the prosecutor, Rourke." Malcolm rubbed his face. "So what? They'll just clamp down harder." "Exactly," Renee said, "which is why you need to maintain discipline. Every slip, every tone, they can use it. Every human instinct to react becomes evidence against you. They're applying pressure to see if you'll break." The next morning, Rourke was waiting when Malcolm was escorted to court. His usual calm, faintly patronizing smile was in place. "You know," he said, leaning close, "the easiest way out is to own up. Take the plea. We'll let you walk." Malcolm's chest tightened. "Own up to a lie I didn't commit?" "Yeah," Rourke said. "Just say it. No one has to know the truth. You keep your freedom. She keeps her story." Malcolm shook his head. "I can't." Rourke's eyes hardened. "Then understand what happens next. Longer hours, tighter monitoring, less leeway." The day dragged. Every step through the courthouse felt like walking on a tightrope. Deputies exchanged glances that conveyed judgment. The ankle monitor hummed steadily against his leg, a small, constant reminder that his freedom was conditional, leased, and fragile. Meanwhile, Tasha had another scare at the clinic. The stress of the past week, compounded by sleepless nights and constant worry for Malcolm, had triggered a contraction. Malcolm paced outside the waiting room, hands clenched. Fear threatened to overwhelm reason. But when the nurse reassured him that Tasha and the baby were fine, the fear morphed into something else. Resolve. Renee returned to update him. "The vendor backup is still untouched," she said. "We need emergency approval to bring it into evidence. And we need it fast, before they have a chance to intervene." Malcolm nodded. "So we push hard?" "Yes," Renee said, "but carefully. If they sense desperation, they'll try to make us flinch." That afternoon, Malcolm's attorney filed a motion to admit the vendor backup into evidence. The motion cited every procedural irregularity, access logs, approval times, chain of custody inconsistencies. The motion went before the judge, and for the first time, Malcolm felt that momentum might finally tip. Outside the courtroom, Lydia Hart arrived with her attorney. Unfazed. Cameras clicked. A small crowd gathered. People whispered, some in support, some in speculation. Malcolm watched from the sidelines, feeling the weight of every eye, every opinion, every assumption. Tasha touched his hand. "We've come this far," she whispered. "You can't let them intimidate you now." "I know," Malcolm said, swallowing the knot of anxiety in his throat. "But every move feels like walking into a trap." Rourke lingered near the prosecutor's table, speaking softly into his radio. His gaze met Malcolm's for a split second, calm, calculated. Malcolm felt the subtle pressure of institutional power pressing down, a constant reminder that he was navigating a world designed to favor the accusation, not the accused. Hours passed. The judge finally called the court into session. "We'll hear arguments regarding the introduction of vendor backup footage," the judge said. The words sounded neutral, but Malcolm felt them reverberate through him like a warning. Renee stood, her voice carried to the courtroom, precise, unwavering. "The footage in question exists in a vendor system, independent of courthouse controls. It is critical to establishing the veracity of events in the lobby. Any failure to admit this evidence is a denial of due process." The prosecutor countered, invoking technicalities and procedural concerns. "The backup system is not certified for primary evidence. Chain of custody could be compromised." Renee countered point by point, citing timestamps, metadata, and official logs. "This is the system's own record," she said. "They cannot argue authenticity without acknowledging their initial approval and subsequent failure to preserve the file. Any alteration is detectable." The judge leaned back. "We will review the vendor backup and determine admissibility." Motion granted temporarily pending verification. Malcolm exhaled, barely noticing the sound. He felt lighter and heavier at once. lighter because truth had a foothold, heavier because nothing had been fully resolved. Later that evening, Malcolm returned to the apartment. Exhaustion etched into his muscles. Tasha greeted him with a quiet hug, her hand resting on his chest. "You did good today," she said. "I didn't do anything," Malcolm said, a bitter laugh escaping. "They just let a little light in." "And that's enough to fight with," Tasha said. They sat together, shoulders pressed, the city lights outside flickering like distant signals. Malcolm thought about the lobby, the box of his life, the accusation, and the long chains of paper, procedure, and lies. He realized that resistance was no longer just about proving innocence. It was about reclaiming agency in a world that had tried to write him out. The next morning, Renee called with news. The vendor had confirmed the backup footage was intact. Emergency motions could proceed. Malcolm felt a pulse of hope, sharp and cautious. Somewhere, Detective Rourke noted the filings with thinly veiled frustration. The pressure was shifting. The system, once so unyielding, now had cracks. And Malcolm, for the first time in weeks, understood that pressure could cut both ways. The lie had been loud, reinforced, and institutionalized. But truth, he realized, had allies, and those allies had just started speaking. The first time Malcolm saw the footage, he didn't breathe. The vendor had complied with the emergency court order. Renee's laptop glowed in the dim conference room, the screen flickering with black and white pixels that captured the courthouse lobby from every angle. Each frame was small, grainy, and mercilessly honest. "There," Renee said, pointing. "That's you, box in your arms," moving calmly toward the clerk's desk. Malcolm's throat tightened. He leaned forward. There she was, Lydia Hart, pocketing her own phone, brushing her wrist, then showing to security as if it were proof. Her movements were deliberate, but she seemed unaware of the camera, unaware of how completely exposed she was. "That's it," Malcolm whispered. "Nothing else." Renee nodded. No grab, no struggle, just reality. For a long moment, they watched the sequence frame by frame. The room smelled faintly of coffee, paper, and fear, the same fear Malcolm had carried in his chest for weeks. "This is what we've been waiting for," Renee said. "The prosecution can't spin this, not if we're careful." Malcolm closed his eyes and let the tension drain from his body. Every replay reinforced what he had felt in the lobby. He had been innocent, but everything around him, the accusations, the bystander testimony, the missing footage, had conspired to make him guilty in the eyes of the system. The next day in court, the motion to introduce the vendor backup was heard. The judge leaned over, hands clasped, face neutral. "Counsel, you may proceed." Renee played the footage, explaining timestamps, metadata, and chain of custody verification. She highlighted moments that contradicted Lydia's testimony. The precise angle of her hand, the absence of contact, the time delay between her wrist mark and her presentation to security. The prosecutor tried to frame it as perception and confusion. "We must consider how Miss Hart experienced the incident," he said. Renee countered, voice sharp, precise. "Perception cannot replace fact. We are presenting objective evidence. The human eye can err. Cameras do not." The courtroom shifted. Jurors leaned forward. The judge's pen hovered over her notepad. Even Rourke's jaw tightened. The first sign of unease Malcolm had noticed in weeks. Lydia's attorney whispered rapidly to her client, but her composure faltered. She adjusted her sleeves, shifted in her chair, glanced at the screen as if the camera itself might accuse her. Malcolm's pulse thrummed in his ears. He watched himself in the footage, calm, methodical, careful, and thought of every fear, every humiliation, every night spent imagining the worst. Now, the system itself could not deny what was true. When the playback ended, Renee addressed the court. "The footage shows no aggression, no assault, no theft. What it shows is Mr. Reed carrying his paperwork and being falsely accused. Any claim to the contrary is inconsistent with the visual record. The integrity of this evidence has been preserved independently of courthouse manipulation." The prosecutor faltered. "Your Honor, we—" The judge held up a hand. "Sufficient. The record will reflect the introduction of the footage. The charges of attempted theft and assault are hereby dismissed pending further review." A low murmur spread through the courtroom. Malcolm blinked, unsure if relief, exhaustion, or disbelief anchored him most strongly. Outside, Tasha was waiting. When Malcolm emerged, she ran to him, arms wrapping around his chest. He felt her shake, felt his own body tremble, and for a brief, sharp moment, the fight drained from him. "They believed you," she said, voice breaking. "We had to make them," Malcolm said, the words bitter, heavy, and true. The courthouse staff looked differently now. Eyes that had once glanced at him with judgment, casual suspicion, or indifference now betrayed a hint of uncertainty. The system had been forced to acknowledge its error. Meanwhile, Renee filed a separate motion to investigate the handling of the original footage, the claims of corruption, misplacement, and tampering. Metadata, access logs, and internal approvals were scrutinized. It became clear that attempts to suppress the truth had been deliberate. Detective Rourke was called in for questioning regarding procedural lapses and delays. He leaned against the wall during the preliminary inquiry, expression neutral but voice clipped. "I followed standard procedure," he said. "Standard procedure that allowed evidence to vanish?" Renee pressed. Rourke said nothing. Malcolm watched from the gallery. The same system that had tried to erase him was now under the microscope. He felt a chill of satisfaction, tempered by weeks of fear and humiliation. Justice was slow, partial, and fraught with cost, but it was beginning to emerge. Lydia Hart was led from the courthouse immediately afterward. Her wrist was no longer the symbol of accusation. It was evidence of falsehood. Civic sponsors and the group that had lauded her bravery quietly withdrew their support. The narrative she had built so carefully unraveled with the weight of fact. Malcolm and Tasha walked hand in hand to the car. Rain had started to fall again, slicking the streets with reflections of neon lights. Malcolm took a deep breath, letting it fill his lungs. "I won't say it feels clean," he said. Tasha shook her head. "It won't ever feel clean, but it's right." Malcolm nodded, thinking of the weeks behind him. The jail, the whispers, the surveillance, the bystanders, the false claims, the pressure. Every moment had etched itself into memory. The fight had not been abstract. It had been lived, embodied, costly. "But it's over," she said. "Not entirely," Malcolm admitted. "There's still investigation, exposure, accountability." "And you survived," Tasha said. "That matters." Malcolm's gaze drifted back toward the courthouse. The red brick walls, the lobby, the bench. It all looked smaller now, diminished in the light of undeniable truth. The story they had preferred could no longer stand. The lie had collapsed under its own weight. And Malcolm, scarred but steadfast, finally stepped into the world as himself. Not as the accusation, not as a statistic, not as the fear others had crafted. The system had been forced to reckon, and though the road ahead would still bear the traces of injustice, for the first time in weeks, Malcolm felt a fragile, fierce spark of clarity and survival. The fight was not yet complete, but for the first time, the scales were balanced in a way that the truth could finally be heard. The courthouse felt different now, not because the building had changed, brick and glass and marble remained unchanged, but because the story had shifted. Malcolm walked to the lobby, unshackled, unmonitored, though the memories of cuffs and the ankle monitor lingered like phantom weight. Detective Rourke's posture had stiffened. His quiet authority, once absolute, now faltered under inquiry. Internal investigations were underway. Questions about missing footage, delayed approvals, and procedural failures. The system had begun to acknowledge what it had tried to suppress. Lydia Hart, once praised for bravery and prudence, faced the consequences of her falsehood. Civic sponsors who had rallied behind her withdrew support quietly, leaving her public statements hollow. Her attorney advised caution, but it was clear the lie had metastasized and now could not survive intact. Malcolm's employer offered reinstatement. The HR department called it recovery of duties, but Malcolm thought of it as symbolic, a recognition that the truth had forced him to honor justice. He accepted neither triumph nor gratitude. It felt too small after weeks of humiliation. Yet the gesture mattered. Paperwork might not erase the stress, the judgmental stares, or the nights Tasha had spent in worry, but it represented acknowledgement. At home, Tasha rested on the couch, her hand brushing over her stomach. The pregnancy was safe now, though the fear of earlier weeks had left its mark. Malcolm sat beside her, feeling the quiet weight of endurance. "It's over," he said softly. "No," Tasha replied. "Not over, but we've survived." He nodded, letting her words settle. Survival did not erase trauma, but offered a foundation for moving forward. Renee Alvarez, ever relentless, coordinated with the courthouse to ensure accountability. Security personnel who had approved the disappearance of footage were placed on leave pending review. Supervisors resigned quietly, and an internal memo circulated acknowledging procedural failures. Even Rourke faced scrutiny for his part in the delay and obstruction. Institutional oversight, however belated, had finally caught up. Kiara Bell's reporting ran in local papers and online forums. Her headline was careful, factual. Courthouse footage clears man wrongfully accused. Internal investigation underway. Readers commented, debated, and for once, engaged with evidence rather than assumption. Malcolm read the coverage, noting that even the digital crowd could be redirected toward truth when the evidence was undeniable. Malcolm filed his expungement again. This time, the paperwork felt different. He had walked through fear, humiliation, and systemic injustice. He had survived attempts to erase him, and now he was reclaiming his narrative. Each signature, each form submitted, was an affirmation. He existed beyond accusation. Walking through the courthouse doors for that final filing, Malcolm noticed the subtle shifts. The clerks who once avoided eye contact now nodded respectfully. Deputies offered professional courtesies. The building itself did not change, but the world within had been forced to recalibrate. Tasha joined him at the desk, a quiet presence grounding him. "They try to define you," she said, "but you still decide who you are." "I'm not the same man who walked in weeks ago," Malcolm admitted, "and that's the cost." Renee stood a few steps away, watching with her usual composed intensity. "Truth isn't free," she said, "but it's worth fighting for." Malcolm thought of every moment, the arrest, the humiliation, the relentless pressure. He thought of every person who had looked at him with preconceived judgment. He thought of Tasha holding him steady, and he realized that justice, when it comes after harm, carries its own emotional cost. Poetic justice had arrived, but it left scars that would never fully fade. Outside, the sun was dipping below the skyline. Rain from the previous days had washed the streets clean, leaving them reflective and quiet. Malcolm and Tasha walked hand in hand, the city lights glinting in puddles, mirroring the delicate shimmer of a hard-won victory. Malcolm knew that systemic injustice would persist elsewhere, that others would endure what had survived, that the world often preferred narratives over facts. But for now, this corner of it had been corrected. "Are you okay?" Tasha asked, eyes searching his. "I will be," he said. Eventually, they paused at the curb, traffic humming past. Malcolm felt the ordinary sensations he had missed, wind on his face, the press of hand against hand, the quiet steadiness of breath. Every ordinary moment felt miraculous after weeks of institutionalized doubt and fear. The courthouse behind them stood silent. It had witnessed the unfolding of lies, the weight of procedural bias, and the eventual triumph of evidence over assumption. Malcolm glanced at it, a mixture of relief and wariness in his gaze. The building remained a place of power, capable of both harm and correction. He had learned to navigate both. Tasha squeezed his hand. "What now?" Malcolm considered the question carefully. "We rebuild," he said. "We continue. And we make sure this doesn't happen to someone else without scrutiny." Renee approached with a folder of reports. "Internal review recommendations," she said. "Policy updates. Accountability steps." Malcolm took the folder, feeling the weight of systemic change press into paper and ink. Not a perfect victory. Far from it. But a concrete step toward preventing the same injustice from being repeated. As the couple walked home, Malcolm felt the full breadth of their ordeal settle around him. The lie that nearly ruined his life had been exposed. Those who had wielded power recklessly faced consequence. Yet the emotional cost lingered, a reminder that justice, even when achieved, comes with scars that only time and care can soften. And still, as he held Tasha's hand and felt the pulse of life inside her, Malcolm understood one truth. Survival was not passive. Truth had been fought for, clawed back from those who would erase it, and now it lived fragile and fierce, alongside him. He stepped forward into the world, scarred but unbroken, ready to live in it fully, even knowing that vigilance was the price of freedom. The system had bowed, however briefly, to truth, and Malcolm, though marked by what he endured, had reclaimed his place in it. The courtroom was quieter than Malcolm expected, not empty, full of people, but the murmurs had a different weight now. Observers, reporters, and even courthouse staff watched with the sense that something irreversible was unfolding. The lie that had nearly destroyed Malcolm's life was about to meet its consequences. Renee Alvarez stood beside him, her posture precise and unyielding. "This is the final hearing for Ms. Hart's false report," she said quietly. Her credibility has already been dismantled by the footage and corroborating evidence. Malcolm nodded. His hands rested on the polished wood of the bench. Weeks of tension, fear, and humiliation had built to this point. He felt hollow in the stomach, but steel in the chest. The prosecutor rose first, voice formal. "The state recommends charges for filing a false police report, obstruction of justice, and perjury, given the deliberate nature of the discrepancies in testimony and physical evidence." Malcolm's eyes flicked to Lydia Hart. She sat rigid, lips pressed in, fingers twisting in her lap. Her once confident gaze now darted nervously to the screen that had exposed the truth, the lobby footage, the metadata, and the chain of custody records. When the judge called her to the stand, Lydia's attorney interceded, but the judge waved him aside. "This is your opportunity to address the court," the judge said. Lydia's voice wavered. I didn't mean for..." "Meaning doesn't matter," Renee interjected. "Intent is considered in sentencing, but the act itself, the filing of a false report and the deliberate misrepresentation, is what place an innocent man in jeopardy." Malcolm felt his chest tighten, not with triumph, but with the accumulated weight of injustice. Every unfair arrest, every skeptical glance, every whispered assumption had led to this moment. He had survived, but the cost was etched deep. Outside, Kiara Bell typed rapidly on her laptop, capturing the courtroom for public record. Her headline was already forming in her mind. "Man falsely accused walks free. Accuser faces consequences." She knew the story would resonate because it wasn't just about one incident. It was about systems, perception, and the fragility of truth. The judge continued. "Given the evidence presented, the court finds the accused liable for filing a false report. Sentencing will follow statutory guidelines. This court also recommends review of the procedures that allowed the suppression of critical evidence to prevent recurrence." Detective Rourke shifted uncomfortably in the back. Internal review had already begun, and his prior actions were under scrutiny. The logs he had approved, the delays he had authorized, the procedural lapses, all had contributed to Malcolm's ordeal. For the first time, the veneer of invincibility the system provided him cracked. Malcolm leaned back slightly, feeling the pressure in his chest ease, but not vanish. Justice had been served in one corner of his life, but it could not erase the anxiety, the judgment, or the way strangers had looked at him as guilty before evidence could speak. After the hearing, Tasha met him outside. Her eyes were wet but bright. "They believe the truth," she said. "You're free, and they can't take that away." Malcolm exhaled. "Not entirely free," he said. "Not from memory, not from the fear." "You survived," she said. "That matters more than anything." He nodded, letting her words sink in. Survival, truth, justice. They were heavy, but necessary. Renee approached with a small folder. "Policy reforms," she said. "Recommendations for courthouse oversight, mandatory video audits, chain of custody reviews. The institution is forced to reckon now." Malcolm took the folder, feeling the weight of procedural change press against his hands. Paper could not erase experience, but it could prevent repetition. Back at home, Malcolm and Tasha sat in quiet reflection. The apartment smelled faintly of rain and laundry, mundane and comforting. He traced his fingers over her hand, feeling the life inside her, a constant reminder of hope and resilience. "I'm not the same man who walked into that lobby," he said. "I carry everything from those weeks, the humiliation, the fear, the anger. It's permanent. But so is the truth," Tasha said. "And so is what we survived together." Malcolm nodded. Truth had been slow, costly, and complicated. It had required allies, persistence, and courage, but it had arrived. Over the following weeks, the courthouse initiated internal investigations, personnel reviews, and policy adjustments. Security staff who had facilitated the disappearance of footage were disciplined or resigned. Supervisors were held accountable. Detective Rourke faced administrative consequences, his career diminished by procedural failures. Malcolm watched the ripple effect with quiet satisfaction. The system had begun to bend to accountability. Even if imperfectly, Malcolm returned to work, his reinstatement quiet, professional, and understated. His colleagues offered polite nods, some tentative apologies. HR acknowledged procedural missteps, though never openly labeling them as failures. Malcolm accepted none of it as personal validation. He did not need their recognition. His vindication had already come through truth itself. He filed his expungement for the second time, this time with renewed confidence. The paperwork moved through the system efficiently, cleanly, with no interference. Each signature, each stamp, each procedural check reaffirmed his agency. He had walked through fire and emerged intact, even if scarred. That evening, Malcolm and Tasha sat on their balcony, city lights flickering like distant signals. The rain had returned, soft and steady, washing the streets clean. "I'm tired," Malcolm admitted. "So am I," Tasha said. "But we're here, together." Malcolm looked at her, hand brushing over hers. "The system failed me, but truth found a way. That's the only victory that matters." "And you've made it count," she said. He leaned back, feeling the weight of weeks lifting, replaced by cautious relief. Scars would remain, the emotional cost of survival, the marks left by fear and suspicion. But so did resilience. The courthouse behind them was silent now, a witness to the reckoning. Lies had crumbled. Evidence had prevailed, and those who wielded power carelessly had faced consequence. Malcolm knew the world beyond these walls would continue to challenge truth, to favor narrative over fact, to judge quickly and without evidence. But he had endured, and for now that was enough. Malcolm stood, hand in Tasha's, and looked toward the future. Scarred, cautious, but unbroken. Justice had arrived. Not cleanly, not fully, but it had arrived. And Malcolm, for the first time in weeks, allowed himself to step forward into a world that had tried to erase him and had failed.